Hello, welcome to the Global Association of Physicians of Indian Origin, GAPIO's keynote panel discussion on leadership mantras. This is going to be a very exciting session. I'm Anupam Sibal, the president of GAPIO, the group medical director of the Apollo Hospitals Group based in India, and a pediatric gastroenterologist. When we think about leadership, several questions come to mind. Are leaders born or are leaders made? Is high intelligence an essential prerequisite? How crucial is emotional intelligence? What virtues are essential for leadership? How important is it to be an extrovert? How important is feedback? How important is servant leadership? How do leaders handle failure? How do leaders handle conflict? To find answers to some of these questions, we have with us today leaders from across the globe. These leaders will share with us their leadership mantras. Our stellar panel has Mr. Lakshman Narasimhan, CEO Reckitt Benckiser based in London, Dr. Ranga C. Krishna, CEO Rush University System based in Chicago, Dr. Pratap C. Reddy, Founder Chairman Apollo Hospitals Group and Founder President GAPIO based in Chennai, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chief Scientist World Health Organization based in Geneva, Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and author and researcher at the Duke University based in Durham. My first question is going to go to Mr. Lakshman Narasimhan. Mr. Lakshman Narasimhan is the CEO of Reckitt Benckiser, RB. Under Lakshman's leadership, RB's purpose is to protect, heal, and nurture in a relentless pursuit of a cleaner and healthier world. RB's brands are available in nearly 200 countries. Prior to joining RB, Lakshman has served as CEO of PepsiCo's Latin American, European, and Sub-Saharan Africa operations, CFO of PepsiCo Americas Foods, and Director of McKinsey & Company. He's a trustee of the Brookings Institute and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Lakshman has an engineering degree, a master's in German and International Studies, and an MBA from the Wharton Business School. Lakshman speaks 6 languages. We're delighted to have you with us, Lakshman. My first question to you is, what is your perspective on leadership?
Thank you for having me on this panel. It's an honor to be part of this convention. I deeply respect what the medical profession does. And so thank you for having me on it. When I think about leadership, I think about 5 things. The first is I think about curiosity, but not just curiosity. I think about relentless curiosity. Because what you realize is that the more that you learn, the less you know. The second thing I've learned is leadership is about humility. The ability to ask the question, the ability to be open to a range of perspectives, and the ability to realize that the world is so much bigger than perhaps what you've been exposed to. Leadership to me is about people. I collect people. And it's very important to think about leadership in that context. The network you build, the people that you're building up, the people that pull you. It's really crucial that you realize that leadership at the end of the day is about people, because the definition of leadership is who follows you. The fourth thing I think about when I think about leadership is I think about balance. Hard to do. Balance between work and life, balance between profit and purpose. And it's very important to realize that this is not just about money. It's about making a huge impact, a huge difference. And so having a balanced perspective is key. The last thing I think about when I think about leadership is I think about resilience. Resilience to me is the ability to recover from setbacks. I am the only surviving child of three. I know that there are many leaders who have been through very difficult experiences going up in life. They've had successes at work, they've had failures. The ability to bounce back from failure, the ability to learn from it, the ability to portray yourself with strength in moments of great, great duress is at the end of the day what a leader does. You not only communicate what the reality is, but you also inspire hope. So when I think about leadership, I think about curiosity, but relentless curiosity. I think about humility. I think about people. I think about balance. And I think about resilience.
How would you describe your leadership style?
I think there's three things that they would say. One is they would say that I do look around corners and think ahead. What's going to happen in 2023, 2022, 2024? I think about that a lot. The second thing they would say is I do set a high bar. I expect a lot. And I know that people who worked with me have realized that this is not just about the bar, but it's also about getting them over the bar. So it's about ensuring that I work together to get a whole bunch of people over the bar. The final thing they would say about me, particularly on leadership, is that I have an external and internal perspective, that I bring the world from the outside in into the company, but also that I take the company out into the world, because we just can't live alone. We just can't be, in our own cell, in our own box. We have got to make a big impact on the communities in which we live and work in. So those are the three things they would say about me, I hope. And hopefully also say that I have a sense of humor, that they find some of the interactions to be quite relaxed and informal. But that's really the how those things get done.
You have worked in 4 continents. What would you say to our participants about working in different cultures, environments based on your extensive experience across so many different countries?
You know, as you look around the world, there are many things that are common, but there are also many things that are different. People all over the world have a great pride in who they are and what they stand for at a local level. And I don't just mean country, I even mean local. Traveling around the world, working in various parts of the world, I have a deep appreciation for what culture means, what symbols mean, and what language is about. You know, when I was in Latin America, they put an Indian to go run it. I didn't speak Spanish. I'm sure they wondered what sort of guy I was. I was referred to in Argentina as El Indio. And I just wanted to be sure that I connected with the front line, with the people. So over the course of 4 months, with tutoring, intense tutoring over the weekends, staying with a Mexican family in Cuernavaca for 10 days or so, I learned how to speak Spanish, largely because I had a big convention that I had to do. And in this convention, I wanted to surprise people by doing the 20-minute opening speech in Spanish. Now, they had no idea I was going to do this. They thought I'd probably do this in English. And I remember going out on stage, there were probably 2,000 people out there, lots of drumming and lights, and it felt like a bit of a rock show. And I was convinced I'd done the stupidest thing in my life by taking on that risk of going out there and speaking to them in Spanish. The first minute was tough, but over the course of that 20 minutes, it was very clear to me that my attempts, my desire, my sort of hope of connecting with the front line is fully accomplished, because they realized that when they met me on the streets, or in their buses where they were selling things, or in the distribution centers, or in the factories, or in the offices, they could speak to me and I would understand them. And for them, that was really important, because everybody wants to share their life story. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is working internationally is about the recognition of patterns. Recife is a town in the northeast of Brazil. I remember landing there, and for some reason, I thought of Bhubaneswar, or I thought about Vishakhapatnam, or some of these towns that are in the eastern part of India, right on the water. And there are lots of things in common as you go out there. You see the custard apple on the street, or you see, the guava in different parts of Latin America, and you recognize symbols and things that, frankly, have traveled various cultures, various countries. It is extremely important to also be a pattern recognizer. Understand that what is happening in certain parts of the world can be repeated in others. And your job as a leader is to recognize those patterns and to facilitate the lifting and shifting of it. So a focus on connecting with people in the front line and winning their hearts, their minds, and actually their hands. And the second thing is recognizing patterns that you can then take from one place to another. And hopefully through that, people can realize the benefits of innovations that have happened in various parts of the world.
Thanks ever so much, Lakshman. It was such a pleasure learning about your leadership mantras. My next question is to Dr. Pratap C. Reddy. Dr. Pratap Reddy is the visionary founder chairman of Apollo Hospitals Group and the founder president of Gapio. Dr. Reddy is widely acknowledged as the architect of modern Indian healthcare. He's been described as a compassionate humanitarian who has dedicated his life to bringing world-class healthcare within the economic and geographic reach of millions of people. Starting with a single hospital in Chennai in 1983, he introduced international quality healthcare to India at a cost that was a fraction of comparable costs in the West. He's an institution builder, having created Gapio, Nat Health, to name a few. Dr. Reddy is the recipient of the Padma Vibhushan and Padma Bhushan, in addition to numerous other awards. We are delighted to have with us Dr. Reddy in this keynote panel. My first question to you, Dr. Reddy, is what is your perspective on leadership?
Thank you, Anupam. First time I say my greetings to the entire members of Gapio. Gapio has been doing very good work in exchanging information and making a difference to wherever they are in the world. This is what we intended. I'm sure many things have happened this year and more should happen, so that we should give that leadership to people. So the novel coronavirus, what we went through now, this pandemic, has been the continuously the possible toughest for any of the leadership tests worldwide. I don't think in our lifetimes, any of our lifetimes, we've seen anything like it. And I think what we have faced is, how did we take this challenge? The pressures that daunted all of us in the front line, from those who fell ill, for millions who lost their business and jobs, and there was no preparation to training for this crisis. I think this was a situation which really tested the strengths of each and every one of us as we moved along to save the millions of people that the medical fraternity has to face. Yet, as a leader, one has to be able to rise above and replenish one's mind, be a rock of empathy, and make sure that there is no lockdowns. Because in healthcare, we can't have lockdowns, and especially in the pandemic, we couldn't afford a lockdown. And I'm happy that many institutions and the doctors, the entire medical staff, we should owe them our gratitude, our admiration for what they did. But I admire the people who steered all of these. That is the leadership. That because we didn't have, like others had, unlock. So without unlocking, as a continuous basis, 24/7, the way the medical leadership took the entire team together to make a significant impact in saving lives, preserving lives, I think is admirable. This is what I think is a tremendous thing that we've done. Moreover, before humanity is watching the leaders, what they say and what they do, and to stay ahead, and beyond dealing with the fires in front of you, a leader has to and must think and plan a longer term what is going to come. I think this is where really we are going to face what is going to come. You need to be very courageous and compassionate and competent in spite of the odds. As you all know, as 2021 is arising, the pandemic probably is coming, to somewhere near controllable stage in some parts of the world, and some parts of the world are still probably a third wave. But we still have what was predicted for this 2020-2030 World Economic Forum, United Nations, and the WHO all have warned, saying 2020-2030, 80% of the deaths will be from NCDs. What are these NCDs? Diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, cancer, infections, and I add two more things to this. First, obesity, and probably the mental illness also should be considered. And so when we are going to face this type of things, they also added the cost burden. The World Economic Forum said the world will have to spend $30 trillion to face this, and India's burden will be $3.8 trillion. You know what $3.8 trillion translates at that time? To 50% of the GDP. We are struggling, asking the government, saying, can you raise it from 1 to 3%? They have brought it to 1 to 1.23% and find difficult to say we'll probably take it 2.5% at the end of 3 years. So this is where the cost burden is going to be. But more than the cost burden, who are these? The people, the people, especially in the Asian front, is different from Caucasian lives. In Asia, the heart attacks used to occur between 30 and 50. Now, as a cardiologist, I'm seeing it between 25 and 40. Similarly, with the strokes, they're occurring between 30 and 50. And who are these 30 and 50, 20 and 40? These are the breadwinners of the family. It's a great loss to the family. It's not the financial loss, it's a loss of the important member of the family. It's a loss to the industry. And more importantly, it is greater loss to the country itself. So I think we have to face this grave situation. We can't afford this, even if the families cannot afford it, and it will have a huge impact on the development of our industries and GDP. As leaders, we must say it's our duty, and we will and we shall bring out the best in us and treat this huge, I would say, worse than the pandemic, worse than what we have seen during the world wars. So I'm sure this is where I always say this. What the professor from Yale said: each of us are priceless, but there is a price to it, and the price is $6,000 trillion. So I think there is a tremendous amount of inner capacity in us. We must bring this out. This is the true leadership. This is the leadership that we need in times when it really has this tremendous challenges that is facing the world. It is not a passing thing. As I said, the COVID probably will be arrested. Once the vaccine comes, probably it will be subdued. But what we are talking about NCDs is a thing which they are predicted for 1 decade, where 80% of the deaths are going to be from this. It's a huge loss and a huge threat. And this is where I think their leadership will make a significant impact in modifying this. And we will, and we should say, we will bring a thought process by showing what we can do to face this. And this is what I call true leadership. And I'm sure the world has, and several of us have this inner strength, and we will bring out this inner strength to face this huge crisis.
Dr. Reddy, how should a leader handle disagreement?
I think it's the most difficult, probably the most rewarding thing. Because if you have two people who are in your team, and if they are fighting with each other and show this total disagreement with what they are talking, I think it's very essential for the leader to see how to understand each other's point and not disagree with anybody, but to see how what is good in each of these and make them understand that these two together will make a significant impact in making a tremendous reward in whatever they are doing. That is leadership. Bringing these two important people who sincerely think that what they think is right, but they totally disagree what other individual or other colleague is saying. So I think our leadership is to understand first that the good points in both and see how we can bring them together. This is not true leadership, it's a great leadership. And I think that will truly change the entire world, whatever we do. And I think as we are talking about the new world 2021 onwards, I think we need people who are going to be having, especially the new younger generation, the newer thought process people have firmly think saying, I have found a way this can make a difference. I think it is for the leader to think, as I have said before, the good on both and bring them together. That will make him a true leader. And moreover, as a leader, one must be mindful that conflict and disagreement can be constructive. This is the most important, as long as it is managed and dealt with directly and quickly. I think, this question is very, very, very important for all of us to remember, because we are constantly going to be facing saying, we have a problem or we have something to roll out, and we have many wonderful team members, and how do you manage this and make the best of use? This is where I think the conflict is going to be, the disagreement, because each one believes that they are right. So I think we need to develop that leadership, which will understand both of them and bring the best to the world, best to the institution, best to the world, and most importantly, in healthcare, it is best to the health of people. God bless.
Thanks ever so much, Dr. Reddy. It was such a pleasure learning about your personal leadership mantras. Dr. K. Rangakrishnan is the Chief Executive Officer of the Rush University System for Health, an internationally known academic health center and health system in Chicago. He also serves as a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Rush Medical College. Dr. Krishnan has served as the Dean of the Rush Medical College and Senior Vice President of the Rush University Medical Center. He served as a member of the board of the Singapore Health Services, or SingHealth, the National Medical Research Council, and the National Health Innovation Center Singapore. He also served as the Dean of the Duke NUS Medical School. He's a member of several professional societies, including the New York Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine. Dr. Krishnan has received numerous honors and awards, including the Distinguished Scientist Award from the American Association of Geriatric Psychiatry and the Public Service Medal Friend of Singapore from the President of Singapore. We are so happy to have you, Dr. Ranga Krishnan, in this panel. My first question to you is, what is your perspective on leadership?
Leadership is an interesting idea. I think the idea of leadership and how it has changed over time is something that we all should keep in mind. When I was growing up, leadership would have been a command and control kind of situation where somebody would tell you, you're going to have to do this is how you do it, and you follow. So leadership was really based more on authority, position, and how you can tell others what to do. The other end of the spectrum is a leadership where you listen to the ground, what the ground tells you, you synthesize it, and you make people come together, work together on an idealized goal. And another form of it, or a related form of it, is called servant leadership. And in servant leadership, what you're trying to do is essentially serve as the flipped pyramid leader. So what do I mean by that? In a pyramid, there's a top-down pyramid. You can actually run it as if you're right at the top, and everything else has to follow through on the instructions that they get from the top. Think of it like the military. The servant leadership is a flipping the pyramid. So the ground actually knows more. They tell you what's happening. And based on what they tell you, each layer above the ground works to make the operation work smoothly. So in other words, you're empowering people in different layers of the organization. So over the years that I have worked at multiple entities, both in Singapore and in the US, I've got to say I learned over time, leadership is all about how you engage people, how you articulate where we are going, the direction, and how you articulate and bring people together to solve problems. And over time, it is cultivating the individuals who are part of your team so that they can become more and more independent in how they make decisions. And they, in turn, can teach others how to be more independent, make decisions, and work together. A lot of leadership is synthesizing the people in the organization in such a way that they can come together and deliver what the organization needs. So, in summary, the modern leader is much more about working with the ground, empowering people, organizing it, and making things work smoothly. What you're trying to avoid is a silo problem. Every group wanting to do their own thing and competing with other groups and not thinking of the whole, and more or less thinking of the individual group themselves. And that's a common problem in large organizations, and one that has to be overcome by thinking of the whole always and working individually so that we can all come towards accomplishing the goal that has been set. A couple of more things about leadership. And one way to think of leadership is it doesn't happen one single day when you become a leader. It actually happens over time. And over time, it is learning to take accountability and responsibility. And the two are equally important. What do I mean by accountable? You can't be a leader who says, I want to be a leader, but if something goes wrong, I'm going to run away. So accountability is being able to take something which is critical, that is responsibility. Being responsible and accountable is a critical part of the leadership. The second thing that people forget is leadership is not what you say, it is what you do. It is how you perform as a leader, how you exemplify the qualities of a leader, and how you bring people together and how you recognize people, support them. One simple thing that works and works really well is when someone does really well, praise them. And the corollary of that is don't take credit when that credit really belongs to somebody else who did all the work. The more you give credit to somebody who did the work, the greater you will be as a leader.
Dr. Krishnan, can you share one real life lesson that our delegates could learn from based on your experience?
So let me tell you, I've had a lot of experiences in life, and I'm very grateful for it. But one interesting experience is delving into the unknown. So if you want to become a leader and build something new, you got to be able to take risk. So I'll give you an example. In the mid 2000s, Duke University, where I worked, signed an agreement to build a medical school in Singapore as a joint venture. And no one has a playbook for building a medical school, let alone a medical school which takes individuals not out of high school, as you see in most of Asia, but students who have at least finished one degree. So I think when you come up with a challenge like that, then the issue is there is no playbook, and you're going to have to figure out how to do it. So I landed in Singapore, and I had a short time period, less than a few months, to get the medical school off the ground, knowing fully well that you can't get every element of the medical school put together in a very short period of time. So our plan was get the right people, and I was very fortunate. I had a couple of really outstanding people already on the ground. And what we did was encourage a team of physicians in Singapore to join together and plan out how we will deliver the curriculum that was done in the West, in the US, to Asia, to Singapore. And so that actually meant breaking that curriculum down into little bits, planning every detail out, and being able to at least have a 3 months to 6 months time ahead of the students. So it was a pretty interesting, stressful period, but it also was a very exhilarating period because the goal was clear. You could get people together, get them to work, and get it done. So the 3 lessons out of it. First is a willingness to take risk, which means also when you do something like that, there will be failures. Second is a willingness to continuously adapt and change. And third, which is more important, is really being resilient and not getting too upset or too unhappy about things when they don't work out. And finally, I've got to say the way this actually worked was we got the school off the ground. A lot of people came together. We delivered the education online initially, and then taught students to take what they learned online, apply it in the real world, and set up an entirely new way of delivering medical education, which has become an exemplar for other institutions around the globe called Team Lead. Learn, engage, apply, develop. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Dr. Krishnan. It was indeed a pleasure learning about your leadership mantras. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. We've been looking forward to hearing from her about so many different aspects of COVID-19. A pediatrician from India and a globally recognized researcher on tuberculosis and HIV, Dr. Soumya brings with her 30 years of experience in clinical care and research, and has worked throughout her career to translate research into impactful programs. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan has served as WHO's Deputy Director General for Programs. She was the Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research from 2015 to 17. From 2009 to 2011, she served as the coordinator of the UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, WHO Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases in Geneva. She's published more than 350 peer-reviewed papers and book chapters She's an elected foreign fellow of the United States National Academy of Medicine and a fellow of all 3 science academies in India. Welcome, Dr. Soumya. My first question to you is, what is your perspective on leadership?
I believe that leadership is something that gets shaped in an individual from very early on in life. And perhaps there are some intrinsic elements of a person's personality that maybe help an individual actually become a leader. So there may be something intrinsic that, some of the traits that you're actually born with. But I think a lot of it is to do with our environment. And this, of course, is, the traditional debate between genetics and environment. And I think, genetics does play a role, no doubt about it. But I believe that environment actually plays a very, very critical role. And particularly the early childhood environment, the kind of opportunities that one is given, the environment at home, the environment in your school and college later on, the role models that you have, the opportunities that you have to observe other strong leaders and be in close proximity with strong leaders and observe their style of functioning. It is a lifelong learning process, I think. But I think the early part of one's years do shape that a lot. So one has to be, in a way, lucky to have those influences in your life. I think role models and mentors are extremely important. And if you have role models in your life, people that you admire, for their qualities that they embody, people that you would like to model yourself on, and also people who can advise you, guide you, and be critical, when it is needed. I think it's really important to have someone tell you, you could have done something better, or next time you have an opportunity, why don't you do it this way, or try a different approach. So that sort of mentoring, which is constructively critical, which provides you feedback and insights into your actions, I think is very valuable. Of course, in the corporate sector, there's a lot of talk about leadership training, but I believe that it's opportunity and how much you're able to learn and absorb and change yourself. So there has to be a willingness also to want to change, a willingness to absorb and to listen and to take on additional challenges and responsibilities. And that's what I think makes one a leader. You grow into it, of course. In my own career, I remember that when I was in my mid-30s and working as a researcher on tuberculosis and HIV, just recently started working on HIV. And in those days, it was early days of HIV in India. There was very little research work being done, and we knew that TB, was a strong co-infection that really impacted the lives of HIV-infected people in India as well as in Africa mainly. And so when I started doing that research, I was asked to go by my director of the institute at that time to Delhi to represent on several, policy level meetings. And I knew that these were quite high level meetings, that there were very senior people there. There were people, who were well established in medicine, mostly older men, who would be in these meetings. And I was very reluctant initially and, felt a little apprehensive whether I would be taken seriously at all. And I remember my director at that time, who has been a very good mentor to me, said, no, you're the technical expert, rather than me going there. That is, the director going just because he's more senior or he has a position in the hierarchy. It should be really the person who knows the subject, and that's you. And you need to be the one representing because you need to bring the strongest science into the discussions. And so he really pushed me into this environment, which at first was intimidating for me. But then as I got used to going to these meetings, I learned to also have my say. You have to be firm when you need to be firm, but you also need to listen to other people and have a a discussion that's grounded in science, but that needs to be constructive, it needs to be pleasant, it needs to accommodate different views. So those opportunities, if they're given to someone early in their career, even going back a little bit further, when I was doing my fellowship in right after my MD, I went to the US, to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and did a fellowship in pediatric pulmonology. And in fact, that he was my first research mentor, I would say, because not only did he train me in research methods, but he also instilled in me a sense of confidence. At that time, I was in my late 20s, and he guided me through different steps of how one becomes a scientist who can go on a public platform and share your findings, express your views, defend them. So he first told me, you need to present at a regional conference first to get a little confidence, because there are a few hundred people there. That was my first oral presentation of some original research work I'd done. And then he said the next step, very quickly, within a few months, was to go on to a national platform, because I had a paper accepted as an oral abstract. I was terrified, but he gave me that confidence to go out there and present. And he said, you've done the work, you know everything about this area. There's nothing to be worried about. There will be some who criticize, there will be people who ask questions, and I'm there to support you. So starting from there, through different phases of my career, I had the people who were there behind me to support, but at the same time said, you need to be out there. You need to face, the community, the scientific community in this case. And of course, you assume responsibilities. You also learn as you go along that when you make mistakes, you then assume you have to take responsibility for the good things, as well as perhaps certain mistakes that you've made in your career. And a good leader owns up to those mistakes and either apologizes and tries to do better the next time around. So that's, possibly the journey that I've had in my life. That's starting from my childhood, when I had very good role models in my parents, as well as a number of other leading scientists from around the world that I had an opportunity to interact with, as well as the scientists and students around where I lived. I grew up in an environment where people were focused on academics, focused on excellence, and focused on making a difference through their work.
Leaders need to possess many virtues. Which virtues you believe are absolutely essential?
Yes, there are many, many qualities one could list that a leader should possess. But I think I would list a couple of ones that I think are critical. And I think I would list as number one, humility. A good leader needs to be humble, needs to be able to listen to different points of view, needs to be able to accommodate in a discussion different points of view, needs to be able to agree to disagree at times, and also needs to have the humility to accept when your own views are wrong. And during a debate or over a period of time, if you get convinced that what the opposition that you started off with was perhaps not the right one, then you need to have that humility and courage to accept that and change your views, because that's going to be based on better data or better argument. So I think that's one. And the other, I think, a necessary element of leadership is listening to people, is always be open to feedback. In fact, not just being open to feedback, but actually go out and try to gather as much inputs as possible before you make up a mind, or you have to make decisions quite often in leadership positions, but you have to try your best to listen to all the key stakeholders in that debate. For example, I come from a clinical and a public health background where you're making decisions on rolling out a particular strategy, for a disease control program. But unless you understand what the end user, the community, whether it's patients or it's actually the community itself, prioritizes, what do they think about your strategy? What do they want? And this was exemplified to me many times in my career when I've actually gone out into communities, into tribal areas, for example, and spoken to people there in those remote tribal villages, their insights, have really changed the way that I thought about something. I would go in there with a view of, taking, let's say, TB control program into that village, finding some volunteers to help with it. And during the course of the discussion, the villagers would say, but TB is not our top priority because it's not that common a disease. You see one patient maybe in a year or so. But what's really pressing here is diarrhea in children, for which we do not have adequate facilities for treatment. Fractures, if someone falls down and has a fracture, we have to walk for miles and miles before we can access healthcare. And I remember in my early 20s, when I was used to trek in the Himalayas, I would meet many villagers along the path. When they heard that there were doctors trekking there, we would actually have these people who had prolonged fever. There were people with fractures who would be carried by their family members to wait on this trekking path for us. And we were just a group of students trekking. We didn't have the wherewithal to treat these people, but it just goes to show that they were so desperate for healthcare at that time. And it opened my eyes and ears a lot so I always have believed that in order to make good decisions, you need to listen to different sides. And as a biomedical scientist, one in one's training, very implicitly, there is a paternalistic attitude. As a doctor, you believe that you are the decision maker and the others around you need to follow instructions. And I again realized early in my career when I spoke with my team members who were nurses, social scientists, health visitors, and people who actually had much closer links with the patient and with the community, that their insights and their advice were extremely helpful in decision making. So maybe the two top qualities I would say are humility and the willingness and ability to listen to people and to take into account all different views before coming to a decision.
Thanks ever so much, Dr. Swaminathan. We were delighted to have you on this panel. Dr. Murali Doraiswamy is a clinician, researcher, academic, and scientist at the Duke University. He's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences. He directs a clinical trials unit developing novel technologies and treatments for enhancing brain health. He served as an advisor to leading businesses, government agencies, and patient advocacy groups. He's a health advisor for Men's Health magazine and AARP magazine. He's a co-author of a popular book, The Alzheimer's Action Plan. His research has been featured in the New York Times, the Oprah Winfrey Show, Dr. Oz Show, CBS Morning, Discovery, BBC, USA Today, NPR. Dr. Doraiswamy is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Councils. He trained in India and the United States, and we are so happy to have him with us. My first question is, what is your perspective on leadership?
Thank you for inviting me to speak at this esteemed gathering. We are living in extraordinary times. The biggest challenges are also the biggest opportunities, and many of the leadership habits that we cultivate now can help us and our teams for years to come. When we talk about doctors and leadership, it almost is very paradoxical because doctors have had no formal training in leadership. The old saying that leaders are born is a myth. We somehow assume that there are leadership genes that are inherited, and those who have those genes make great leaders, like Nehru or Gandhi, but that's not true. The opposite is true, in fact. Great leaders are made rather than born. People give up trying to become a leader before they even try, or they don't know where to start. All leadership skills can be learned. So let's talk about a few traits that successful leaders have, at least based on my definition of leadership. The first question I think we should all ask ourselves, would you rather succeed, or would you rather see other people succeed, others in your team succeed? You know, as a doctor, all of us define success caring for our patients. We want to improve their diseases. We want to cure their conditions. We want to prevent diseases. And we also want to grow ourselves as physicians in our own skills, whether as a surgeon, whether as an endocrinologist, whether as a radiologist, by taking CME courses, etc. But when one thinks about leadership, it's all about inspiring and growing others. It's not just about growing yourself. You know, I'm reminded of a famous saying by Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "I consider myself a zero. I make myself a zero." And what he meant by that is that everything he did was for the benefit of others and not for ourselves. So really, as doctors now, we need to think beyond our own clinics and say, how can we become leaders to enhance population health, to improve the health of the nation? Not only are we dealing with the pandemic, we're dealing with multiple pandemics. We have the COVID-19 pandemic, but before that, almost 50% of mortality in India is from infectious diseases, and the other 50% is from an explosion of non-communicable diseases such as obesity, diabetes, etc. So we need to think about how can we change our perspective, how can we change our mindset to address some of these challenges. The second key aspect of leadership, to me at least, from the point of view of a doctor, is we really need to stay up to date on all the latest developments happening outside of our own narrow area. And many of us are not that up to date. You know, there are 3 or 4 major revolutions happening place in telecommunication technology, mobile, big data, artificial intelligence, genomics. These are areas that are going to have a dramatic impact on humanity in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, we think of ourselves as having high IQ. There are now computer programs that can beat humans on simple IQ tests. AI-based algorithms are going to drive care. So it's really crucial for us to stay on top of some of these new emerging technologies. So really, one way to think of ourselves is how can we make ourselves an algorithmic doctor? The doctor that knows best how to harness emerging technologies such as AI, big data, wearables, smartphones in the care of their patients to enhance their well-being will become the leader. So we need to have a growth mindset. And the third and the last is, how big is your vision? You know, many of us as doctors really focus on narrow things in our clinic, in our patients, and when we read research studies, we say, wow, the drug produced a 20% improvement in cancer remission, or a 20% improvement in depression scores, things of that sort. But true visionaries don't think on that scale. They think on a scale that is much larger. They think about how can we make a 10-fold improvement to status quo. So they're really talking about 1,000% improvement. So really, as a doctor, we need to think big, because if we don't think big, then we won't achieve the true mission and the true purpose, and we won't inspire people to follow us as leaders. So I want to end again with a quote that is widely attributed to Gandhi, but he didn't quite say it exactly the way that it's quoted. We should all be the change that we want to see in the world. Let us lead by example. Because, you know, all of us as leaders, we think we're perfect, but in reality, others can see our imperfections better than we can. You know, I'm reminded of an old saying. It's a funny saying, but it's true. It says, keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. What do we mean by that? We want to know what our critiques think of us because they are like a mirror. Humans, every human being has cognitive biases and blind spots. So one has to have the humility and the confidence that our own personal worldview may be imperfect. So I think we need to realize that all criticism and all feedback is a gift, even if it's sometimes hurtful. And we need to listen fully to the criticism. We should not interrupt them in the middle before we speak. And then we need to thank them. You know, we as humans, our brains, you know, I'm also a brain scientist. Our brains are wired for something called the fight or flight response. So when we see a threat, our instinct is to either fight or to flee the scene. And that is not a good strategy to handle criticism. It is very unsuited. So we need to avoid what is called as an angry, hot-headed response. So there is something called hot cognition. When you get angry, we use bottom-up processing. The limbic system kicks in and all of a sudden we say something and we regret it later. So the best way is avoid sending any immediate emails or responses. Take some time, sleep over it overnight before you hit that send button on your email. Focus on the facts. The next day, what happens is your brain, when the stress level goes down, your brain starts processing things in a completely different process called cold cognition or top-down processing. You're able to focus on the facts. You're able to reflect whether what the criticism that was leveled at you, is there any truth to it or is there not truth to it? And the best way is to get an impartial third person's opinion. Call your friend, call your spouse, call another mentor you may have and get their opinion. And then if the criticism is true, you really, really should go about trying to make changes, both in your own behaviors and in your strategy or plan or whatever else was criticized. So how can we all become good at this? Because no one is really good at it. We have to prepare for it and we have to practice and we have to always keep this. And remember, hot cognition is bad for you. Cold cognition is good for you. Always thank the people who are criticizing you.
Thanks ever so much, Dr. Doraiswamy. It was a pleasure learning about your leadership mantras. All of you would agree that this has been an absolutely fascinating session with so much to soak in, so much to take home, and so much to deploy in our lives. With all this learning, I'm sure each one of us will be motivated to unleash the leader that lies within. Thanks ever so much for joining us.